Father and two children vanished without a trace, leaving behind only unanswered questions and heartbreak. 6 years of searching yielded nothing but dead ends and fading hope, until a hunter's dog uncovered something that would change everything forever. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. On July 19, 2014, Michael Walker packed his weathered pickup truck with camping gear, a cooler of snacks, and his two most precious treasures, 10-year-old Ethan and 8-year-old Sophie. The former Army sergeant moved with practiced efficiency, checking his son's inhaler twice before tucking it safely in the front pocket of Ethan's backpack. The Boise native had planned this weekend getaway for weeks, marking it on the kitchen calendar with a red circle that promised escape. The Sawtooth Mountains had always been their sanctuary. Rising majestically north of Stanley, Idaho, the jagged peaks and pristine alpine lakes offered Michael and his children what their Meridian home could not: freedom from the crushing weight of memory. His wife's empty chair at the dinner table, the stack of medical bills that grew despite her absence, the quiet of nights when the children finally slept and he faced his grief alone. "We're going to catch the biggest fish ever," Sophie declared as they drove the winding mountain roads, her small hands clutching a pink fishing rod that had been a birthday gift from her Aunt Jennifer. Ethan pressed his face against the window, inhaler in hand, eyes wide with anticipation rather than the anxiety that often troubled his breathing. By mid-afternoon, they had established their campsite near Alpine Lake. Michael expertly pitched their blue dome tent, while the children collected pine cones and explored the shoreline under his watchful gaze. The mountain air was crisp and clean, a balm for Ethan's asthmatic lungs and Michael's burdened heart. As sunset painted the Sawtooths in gold and crimson, the father gathered his children beside their tent. "Smile," he instructed, holding up his smartphone. The resulting photograph captured 3 sun-kissed faces: Sophie with her missing front tooth, Ethan with his father's serious eyes, and Michael with a rare, unguarded smile. He texted the image to his sister with a simple message: "Found our piece of heaven." Jennifer received the photo and replied immediately with heart emojis and wishes for marshmallows and ghost stories. She had no way of knowing this digital snapshot would become evidence in a missing persons case. No way of understanding that these 3 smiling faces would soon stare out from posters and news reports across the Pacific Northwest. The Walkers had planned to return to Boise on Sunday evening. Monday morning would bring Ethan's doctor appointment and Sophie's summer reading program. But when neither school nor clinic received calls explaining their absence, the first threads of concern began to unravel. By Tuesday, Jennifer had reported them missing, and search teams were combing the wilderness around Alpine Lake. That innocent family photo, 3 smiling faces beside a blue dome tent, would be the last confirmed sighting of the Walker family. What began as a weekend of healing would spiral into a 6-year mystery that would change Idaho forever. The search and rescue team arrived at Alpine Lake 3 days after Jennifer Walker reported her brother and his children missing. What they found left them baffled. Michael Walker's blue dome tent stood perfectly intact, anchored firmly to the rocky soil beneath towering pines. The zipper was fully closed, as if the family had simply stepped out for a moment and intended to return. Inside the tent, 3 sleeping bags lay in neat parallel lines, the larger one presumably Michael's, with Ethan and Sophie's smaller ones arranged beside it. Their backpacks rested against the tent wall, still containing clothing, food supplies, and a family photo album Jennifer had mentioned Michael always brought on their trips. "It's like they vanished mid-vacation," whispered Deputy Sheriff Thomas, the lead searcher, as he cataloged the undisturbed items. Michael's military-grade flashlight sat on top of a paperback novel, a bookmark still holding his place. Sophie's stuffed rabbit, which Jennifer had specifically mentioned her niece never went anywhere without, lay abandoned on her sleeping bag. The team expanded their search perimeter, combing through the dense forest surrounding Alpine Lake. They brought in specialized scent dogs from the Boise K-9 unit, hoping to track the family's movement. The German Shepherds picked up the walker's scent immediately, following it from the parking area where Michael had left his pickup truck along the trail to their campsite and directly to the tent's entrance. Then, inexplicably, the trail went cold. "The dogs just stopped and started circling," explained K-9 handler Melissa Reeves. "They behaved as if the scent simply disappeared at the tent's threshold. In 23 years of search and rescue, I've never seen anything like it." The team searched for signs of struggle or disturbance. Broken branches, scuff marks, blood. Anything that might indicate what had happened to the former Army sergeant and his children. They found nothing. No footprints leading away from the site. No evidence of wildlife interference. The campfire pit contained only cold ashes, suggesting it hadn't been used since the previous evening. Detective Maria Santos arrived by helicopter that afternoon, her expression grim as she surveyed the scene. She methodically photographed the campsite, paying particular attention to the 3 untouched water bottles and the family's hiking boots, still neatly arranged outside the tent. "People don't just evaporate," she muttered, kneeling to examine the ground, especially not a trained military man and 2 children. As daylight faded and fog rolled in from the lake, an eerie silence fell over the campsite. The search team exchanged uneasy glances. The pristine condition of the walker's belongings suggested no panic, no hurried escape, just a complete and total absence that defied explanation. On July 21, 2014, the skies above the Sawtooth Mountains darkened without warning. What began as scattered raindrops quickly escalated into one of the most devastating weather systems Idaho had witnessed in decades. The storm descended with merciless force, dumping 8 inches of rain in just 72 hours across the wilderness where Michael Walker and his children had vanished. Search and rescue teams, already struggling to make sense of the family's disappearance, were forced to evacuate as lightning split ancient pines and thunder echoed through the valleys. Detective Maria Santos received the evacuation order with visible frustration. "Every hour counts in missing persons cases," she told her team as they reluctantly packed their gear. "This storm is destroying what little evidence we might have had." The detectives' concerns proved prophetic. Alpine Lake, normally a serene body of water nestled among towering peaks, swelled beyond its banks. Creeks transformed into raging torrents, carving new paths through the forest floor. The earth itself seemed to liquefy as saturated soil gave way, triggering landslides that reshaped entire hillsides in minutes. Jennifer Walker, who had been assisting searchers since receiving her brother's final text message, watched helplessly from a motel in Stanley as weather reports documented the destruction. The sister clutched her phone, scrolling repeatedly through the last photo Michael had sent. Ethan and Sophie, smiling beside their blue dome tent, unaware of what lay ahead. The mountains were his sanctuary, she whispered to a sympathetic park ranger. After losing his wife, Michael found peace there with the kids. How could this happen? When rescue operations finally resumed 4 days later, the landscape had been transformed. The area where the Walkers' campsite had stood was now buried beneath 3 feet of mud, rocks, and splintered trees. Their tent, sleeping bags, and personal belongings, potential clues to their whereabouts, lay entombed beneath the debris. A volunteer firefighter from Boise who participated in both search efforts described the scene. "It was like nature had erased a chalkboard. Before the storm, we had footprints, disturbed vegetation, things we could track. Afterward, nothing. The wilderness had swallowed everything." For the search teams, the storm's timing couldn't have been worse. Any trace of the family's movements, footprints leading away from camp, discarded items, even signs of struggle, had been obliterated by the weather's fury. What might have been crucial evidence now lay beneath tons of displaced earth, washing away hope along with the mountainside. As July turned to August, the mystery of what happened to Michael, Ethan, and Sophie Walker deepened. Buried beneath layers of mud and unanswered questions. Detective Maria Santos arrived at the Boise Police Department early, her desk already covered with files on the Walker family. As the lead investigator, she had spent weeks piecing together Michael Walker's life before his disappearance. What she discovered painted a troubling picture: $127,000 in medical debt, credit cards pushed to their limits, and a second mortgage on his modest Meridian home. "Look at these numbers," Maria told her partner, spreading bank statements across the conference table. The man was drowning financially. The detective traced Michael's downward spiral to his wife's prolonged illness 3 years earlier. Cancer treatments had depleted their savings, and insurance had covered barely half the expenses. After her death, the former Army sergeant had been fighting a losing battle against mounting bills while raising 2 children alone. Some officers speculated that Michael, overwhelmed by financial pressure and grief, had engineered his own disappearance. Perhaps he had taken the children somewhere to start fresh, abandoning his debts and painful memories. The theory gained traction when Maria discovered he had withdrawn $800, nearly everything in his checking account, the day before the camping trip. "Desperate people make desperate choices," one colleague suggested, but Jennifer Walker vehemently rejected this narrative. "My brother would never abandon his responsibilities," she insisted during her 3rd interview at the station. "He was a soldier. He faced problems head-on." Maria's investigation soon supported Jennifer's faith. Michael's doctor described a father determined to provide stability for his children despite his circumstances. His employer at the construction company spoke of a man who never missed a shift, often working overtime to cover Ethan's asthma medication. Neighbors recalled him coaching Sophie's soccer team despite exhaustion from working double shifts. Most telling were the text messages on Michael's laptop, which Maria obtained with a warrant. In messages to Jennifer, he had written about the camping trip as healing time for the family, not an escape plan. He had even scheduled parent-teacher conferences for the following week. He was planning for their future, Maria noted in her report. Not planning to disappear. The detective found herself increasingly troubled by the evidence. Michael Walker wasn't running from his problems. He was confronting them with the discipline and resilience that had defined his military service. His financial struggles were real, but his commitment to Ethan and Sophie appeared unwavering. As Maria closed the file that evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that something far more sinister than financial desperation had befallen the Walker family in those remote mountains. The father she had come to know through her investigation wasn't fleeing from his children. He was fighting for them. By the summer of 2016, the Walkers' faces had begun to fade from the missing person posters that once plastered Idaho's highways and trailheads. The vibrant photos of Michael Walker and his children had weathered under sun and rain, their edges curling and colors bleeding away, much like the public's attention to their case. 2 years had passed since that fateful July weekend, and the Sawtooth Mountains had claimed other victims, created new stories, and buried old mysteries beneath seasons of snow and renewal. Online forums buzzed with increasingly outlandish theories. Some insisted Michael, overwhelmed by debt and grief, had staged an elaborate disappearance to start fresh somewhere else. Others claimed the family had been abducted by strangers or fallen victim to a wilderness predator. The most fringe communities spoke of supernatural forces, portals in the mountains, or alien abductions, explanations that filled the void where facts should have been. Detective Maria Santos continued to review the case files periodically, but with no new evidence and dwindling resources, the investigation had effectively gone cold. The storm that had ravaged the mountains had also washed away any hope of finding conclusive evidence. Jennifer Walker, however, refused to let her brother and his children become just another wilderness statistic. She sold her modest home in Boise, moving into a small apartment and pouring every dollar into the search. She hired private investigators, funded drone surveys of remote areas, and organized volunteer search parties during the summer months. "Michael would have moved heaven and earth to find me," she told local reporters, during a candlelight vigil on the second anniversary. "I won't do any less for him and the kids." Each year, Jennifer worked with forensic artists to create age-progressed images of Ethan and Sophie. The renderings showed how the children might look as they grew older. Ethan's asthma inhaler still clutched in his hand, Sophie's smile widening with her missing baby teeth now grown in. These images appeared on billboards throughout the Northwest, a haunting reminder that somewhere these children might still be alive, growing up without knowing who they truly were. The sister established a foundation in the family's name, raising awareness about wilderness safety and advocating for improved emergency response protocols in remote areas. Her dedication inspired many, but behind closed doors, even Jennifer struggled with doubt. In her darkest moments, she wondered if she was chasing ghosts, if her beloved family had already found peace somewhere beyond her reach. Still, every morning she woke up and continued the search, because giving up would mean accepting they were truly gone. Every July, the story of the Walkers resurfaced across Idaho's media landscape. KTVB Boise ran special segments featuring the computer-generated images of what Ethan and Sophie Walker might look like now. Their faces artificially aged by forensic artists, growing up in pixels when they couldn't grow up at home. Jennifer Walker made sure her niece and nephew weren't forgotten. She coordinated with news outlets throughout the Pacific Northwest, from small-town papers in Stanley to major networks in Portland and Seattle. The age progression photos became her most powerful tool. Ethan's asthma inhaler digitally removed, Sophie's smile brightened. Both children's features matured by algorithms that could only guess at what time would have truly done. "These aren't just pictures," Jennifer told reporters during the third anniversary. "They're possibilities. Somewhere, someone might recognize these faces." Detective Maria Santo supported these media pushes, though privately she harbored doubts. The Boise Police Department kept the case open but inactive, the detective's desk drawer holding a file that grew thinner on leads with each passing season. The images became a fixture in Idaho's collective consciousness, appearing on billboards along Interstate 84, pinned to community boards at grocery stores, and shared thousands of times across social media. Local businesses in Meridian, where Michael had lived, displayed the progression photos near their registers. The Outdoor Exchange, where Michael had purchased his blue dome tent, kept a permanent memorial by their camping section. For the residents of Boise, the photos stirred complicated emotions. Parents held their children closer when hiking the same mountains. Campers at Alpine Lake reported feeling uneasy, knowing they pitched tents where a family had vanished without explanation. The Sawtooth Mountains, once simply majestic, now carried whispers of something darker. Each year, the digitally aged faces of Ethan and Sophie grew older, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, while their father remained forever 42 in the last photograph taken at their campsite. The boy who needed an inhaler to breathe the mountain air was now depicted as a preteen with his father's jawline. The little girl with pigtails they offered the illusion that her niece and nephew were still growing up somewhere, yet emphasized the cruel reality that she was missing those years entirely. "Time doesn't stop for missing children," Jennifer said during a candlelight vigil on the 5th anniversary. But neither does hope. The photos became symbols of both, frozen moments of what might have been, digitally reaching forward into a future that remained heartbreakingly uncertain. The crisp October air carried the scent of pine and damp earth as Earl Hutchkins made his way along the familiar trail near Redfish Lake. At 71, the retired postal worker still moved with surprising agility, his weathered face creased by decades of Idaho sunshine. His loyal German short-haired pointer, Rex, trotted ahead, nose to the ground, occasionally glancing back as if to ensure his human companion was keeping pace. "Easy there, boy," Earl called, as Rex disappeared around a bend in the trail. The Sawtooth Mountains loomed above them, their jagged peaks catching the morning light. This was their ritual, these autumn hunts that had nothing to do with bringing home game and everything to do with the quiet communion between man, dog, and wilderness. The silence broke with Rex's frantic barking. Earl quickened his steps, rounding the bend to find his companion digging furiously at the base of a massive boulder. The rock itself bore the scars of the devastating storm that had ravaged these mountains 6 years prior. The same storm that had complicated the search for the Walker family. "Rex, what have you got there?" Earl approached cautiously, watching as the dog's paws scattered dirt and decayed leaves. Something about the animal's intensity gave the hunter pause. In 40 years of roaming these mountains, he'd never seen Rex behave quite this way. Kneeling beside his dog, Earl gently moved him aside and began clearing away the disturbed soil with gloved hands. The earth here was different, looser, as if it had been displaced and resettled. Years of hunting had taught him to read the land, and something about this spot felt wrong. His fingers brushed against something solid beneath the soil. Not rock, something smoother, curved. Earl's breath caught as he carefully brushed away more dirt, revealing what was unmistakably a fragment of human bone. Tangled around it was a piece of faded fabric, once blue perhaps, now stained by years beneath the earth. "Oh Lord," he whispered, sitting back on his heels. The bone fragment lay exposed now, partially unearthed by the recent autumn rains and Rex's determined digging. Earl knew immediately this was no animal remain. His mind flashed to the missing posters that had once papered every trailhead in the Sawtooths. The father and his 2 children, who had vanished without a trace. With shaking hands, Earl reached for his phone. The device showed only 1 bar of service, typical for these remote areas, but it would have to do. He dialed emergency services while Rex continued to circle the disturbed earth, whining softly as if he understood the gravity of his discovery. What had begun as a routine morning in the mountains had suddenly become something else entirely, the first break in a 6-year-old mystery that had haunted the entire state of Idaho. Within 24 hours of Earl Hutchkins' discovery, the remote area near Redfish Lake transformed into a meticulous crime scene. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Amelia Chen led the excavation team as they carefully removed layers of soil that had been disturbed by both the violent storm of 2014 and Rex's determined digging. The team worked methodically, documenting every fragment and fiber. By the second day, they had uncovered 2 complete skeletal remains. DNA testing confirmed what Jennifer Walker had insisted for 6 years. One of the bodies belonged to her brother, Michael Walker. The former Army sergeant's remains showed defensive fractures to his forearms and hands, suggesting he had fought fiercely in his final moments. The evidence indicates Michael died protecting someone, Detective Maria Santos explained at the press briefing. The damage to his metacarpals is consistent with someone throwing multiple punches. The second skeleton proved to be the investigation's first major breakthrough. The remains belonged to an adult male in his 30s, with a distinctive healed fracture in his left femur. Most telling was the fatal trauma to his skull, a crushing blow that forensics determined came from a rock or similar heavy object. "We believe Michael Walker inflicted this injury while defending himself and possibly his children," Maria told the assembled reporters, her voice steady despite the gravity of her words. This wasn't a father harming his family, as some had speculated. This was a parent fighting for their lives. The discovery vindicated Jennifer, who had spent years defending her brother's character against whispered accusations. The medical examiner's report confirmed Michael had died from multiple stab wounds to his chest and abdomen, likely after incapacitating his attacker. "My brother would never have abandoned his children," Jennifer said, tears streaming down her face as she stood at the edge of the excavation site. "He loved them more than anything in this world. Most significantly, the absence of Ethan and Sophie's remains raised new, troubling questions. If Michael had died fighting an unknown assailant, what had happened to his children? The discovery transformed the narrative from a possible murder-suicide or tragic accident to something far more sinister, an apparent abduction following a deadly confrontation. For the residents of Boise, who had followed the case for years, the revelation was both shocking and heartbreaking. Michael Walker hadn't disappeared with his children. He had died trying to save them. And somewhere, perhaps, Ethan and Sophie might still be alive. Detective Maria Santos turned the tarnished piece of metal over in her gloved hands. The dog tag had been partially buried beneath Michael Walker's remains, its chain tangled among weathered bone fragments. Though scratched and discolored, the name J. Cole remained clearly visible, alongside a service number that made no sense. "This doesn't match any active military records," Maria announced to the forensic team working the excavation site. "The number sequence is wrong for any branch of service." The discovery changed everything they thought they knew about the Walker family's disappearance. For 6 years, theories had ranged from Michael taking his own life to a tragic hiking accident. Now, this small piece of metal suggested something far more sinister. Back at Boise Police Headquarters, Maria ran the name through criminal databases. The results sent a chill through the investigation team. Jason Cole had been dishonorably discharged from the Army 4 years before the Walkers vanished. His record included assault charges, weapons violations, and suspected involvement in trafficking operations across state lines. "There's absolutely no connection between Michael and this man," Jennifer Walker insisted when shown Cole's mugshot. Her hands trembled as she pushed the photo away. "My brother was a good man. He wouldn't associate with someone like this." Maria believed her. The former sergeant and the dishonorably discharged soldier operated in completely different worlds. Michael had been a decorated veteran, a devoted father struggling with medical debt. Cole was a known criminal with violent tendencies. "We need to consider the possibility that Michael and the children weren't alone at Alpine Lake," Maria explained to her captain. "This wasn't a disappearance. It was an encounter." Forensic analysis of the second set of remains confirmed they belonged to Jason Cole. The positioning of the bodies told a harrowing story. Michael and Cole had died in proximity, likely during a violent struggle. Defensive wounds on Michael's remains suggested he had fought desperately, perhaps to protect Ethan and Sophie. The dog tag became the first tangible piece of evidence pointing to foul play. It transformed the narrative from a mysterious vanishing to something more calculated and deliberate. Michael hadn't simply disappeared with his children. They had been targeted. As investigators widened their search around the gravesite, the question shifted from what happened to the Walkers to who else was involved with Jason Cole that night. The dog tag, once a symbol of military service, now represented something far darker, a clue to a criminal operation that had claimed at least 2 lives and left 2 children unaccounted for. Jennifer stared at the evidence bag containing the tarnished metal. "This means Michael fought back," she whispered. "He didn't abandon them. He tried to save them." Among the scattered evidence at the gravesite, forensic technicians discovered a Samsung smartphone. Its case cracked and weathered by 6 years of exposure to the elements. The device was barely recognizable, caked in mud and partially corroded from moisture that had seeped through its damaged exterior. Detective Maria Santos personally delivered it to the FBI's Digital Forensics Lab in Boise, where technicians worked meticulously to recover any data that might have survived. 3 days later, Maria received the call she had been waiting for. Despite the extensive damage, specialists had managed to extract fragments of data from the device's memory. Among these was a partially recovered text message sent on July 20th, 2014, the night the Walkers vanished. Package secured, 2 items as requested, adult neutralized, en route to delivery. The clinical, detached language sent chills through the investigation team. Michael Walker and his children had been reduced to packages and items, dehumanized by whoever had orchestrated their abduction. "This changes everything," Maria told Jennifer Walker during their somber meeting at the Boise Police Department. "Your brother didn't just disappear. He fought back." Jennifer clutched the printed copy of the message, her hands trembling. "He would never have let them take Ethan and Sophie without a fight," she whispered. "Never." Further analysis of the phone revealed it belonged to Jason Cole, though it had been registered under a false name. Blood residue found embedded in the cracks of the screen matched Michael's DNA, suggesting a violent struggle had occurred. The message also confirmed the investigators' worst fears. At least 2 of the Walkers had been taken alive that night. 2 items almost certainly referred to Ethan and Sophie, while Michael, the adult, had been neutralized. For the first time in 6 years, the narrative shifted. This wasn't a case of a desperate father fleeing with his children, nor was it a tragic accident in the wilderness. The Walkers had been targeted, hunted, and Michael had died protecting his children. The phone also yielded partial GPS data, showing movement from the Sawtooth Mountains southward toward Nevada in the hours after the message was sent. This crucial information would later help investigators track the kidnappers' escape route through the rugged terrain of southern Idaho. As word of the discovery spread through the department, the investigation took on new urgency. Michael Walker was no longer a suspect, but a victim, a father who had given his life in a desperate attempt to save his children from an organized abduction. The discovery of the battered phone transformed the investigation overnight. Special Agent Thomas Reeves arrived from the FBI's Boise field office within hours of Detective Maria Santos's urgent call. The Bureau's forensic team carefully extracted data from the damaged device, revealing crucial information that local authorities couldn't access. "This isn't just a missing persons case anymore," Reeves explained to Jennifer Walker during their first meeting. "This is organized crime crossing state lines." The FBI's technical specialists worked tirelessly to recover data from the SIM card. Despite water damage, they managed to extract not only the chilling text message, but also location data and call logs. These digital breadcrumbs created a timeline of Jason Cole's movements in the days following the Walkers' disappearance. Cole's phone had pinged towers along a southbound route from the Sawtooth Mountains through Twin Falls and into Nevada. The FBI cross-referenced this data with surveillance footage from gas stations and rest stops, identifying a black pickup truck traveling the same route. 2 men accompanied Cole, Derek Miles and Rory Sanchez, both with extensive criminal records spanning multiple states. "These aren't amateurs," Agent Reeves told Maria Santos as they reviewed the suspect's files. "Miles has connections to organized crime in Las Vegas, and Sanchez has prior arrests for trafficking stolen goods across state lines." Jennifer clutched her brother's photograph as she listened to the briefings, her face a mask of determination despite the horrifying revelations. "Michael would have fought them," she whispered. "He would never have let them take the children without a fight." The FBI established a task force dedicated to the Walker case, setting up surveillance on Miles and Sanchez in Reno. For 3 weeks, agents monitored their movements, gathering evidence and preparing for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came during a late-night meeting at a Reno motel. FBI tactical teams surrounded the building while Miles and Sanchez discussed another job with potential accomplices, undercover agents who had infiltrated their network. The arrest was swift and decisive. Under separate interrogations, both men initially maintained their innocence, but when confronted with the evidence from Cole's phone and DNA samples matching blood found on Michael Walker's recovered clothing, their unified front crumbled. "We've got them," Agent Reeves told Jennifer over the phone, "and they're talking." For the first time in 6 years, the truth about what happened that night in the Sawtooths was about to emerge. Jennifer Walker sat in her small apartment, surrounded by maps and missing person flyers, tears streaming down her face as she realized the search for answers was finally bearing fruit, though the answers themselves might bring even greater pain. Derek Miles stared at the table in the FBI interrogation room, his shoulders slumped in defeat. After 48 hours of questioning, he finally broke. The confessions spilled out in fragments, each more disturbing than the last. "It wasn't personal," Miles muttered. "We were paid to take the kids, just the kids." Across town, Rory Sanchez corroborated the story to a different set of agents. The two men had been hired through Jason Cole, their military connection, to abduct Ethan and Sophie Walker from the Sawtooth Mountains. The location wasn't random. It was selected for its remoteness and poor cell reception. Michael wasn't supposed to fight back, Sanchez explained, touching the scar that ran along his jawline. Cole said he'd be easy, just a broken dad drowning in debt. They had grossly underestimated the former Army sergeant. When the three men approached the blue tent that night, Michael Walker erupted with the ferocity of a wounded bear. In the ensuing struggle, he managed to slash Miles across the chest with a camping knife and break Sanchez's nose before Cole pinned him down. "I've never seen anyone fight like that," Miles admitted. Not for himself, for those kids. The interrogation tapes revealed how Michael had killed Jason Cole, crushing his windpipe in a desperate chokehold before the other two men finally subdued him. They buried both bodies hastily before the storm hit, never expecting the earth would eventually give up its secrets. "The boy kept asking for his inhaler," Sanchez said, his voice hollow. "We didn't know about his asthma. Nobody told us." Ethan had been gasping for breath as they carried the children to their waiting vehicle. Sophie had screamed for her father until Miles threatened to hurt her brother if she didn't quiet down. The most chilling revelation came when agents asked who had hired them. "We never met them," Miles said. "Cole handled that part. All we knew was the price. $25,000 per child." The FBI's child trafficking unit recognized the pattern immediately. The Walkers weren't victims of opportunity. They had been specifically targeted through hospital records that revealed Ethan and Sophie's rare blood type and genetic markers. Someone had paid a premium for children with their specific biological profile. For Jennifer Walker, watching the confession tapes brought both vindication and horror. Her brother hadn't abandoned his children or taken his own life. He had died protecting them, fighting against impossible odds in the darkness of the Sawtooth Wilderness. "Michael knew," she whispered to Detective Santos as the video ended. Somehow, he knew they were coming for his children. Derek Miles hunched forward in the FBI interrogation room, his voice barely above a whisper as he finally revealed Ethan Walker's fate. The boy had been struggling for breath almost immediately after the abduction. Without his medication, Ethan's asthma had rapidly deteriorated as they drove south through the night. "The kid kept asking for his inhaler," Miles confessed, unable to meet Special Agent Rodriguez's eyes. "We didn't know he needed it that bad. By morning, he was wheezing so hard he couldn't talk." According to Miles, they had stopped at a pharmacy outside Twin Falls, stealing an over-the-counter inhaler that provided only temporary relief. Despite their criminal intentions, even Miles and Sanchez had panicked as they watched the 10-year-old boy's condition worsen. They were kidnappers, not murderers, at least not intentionally. 3 days after taking the children, somewhere on the outskirts of Elko, Nevada, Ethan Walker took his final labored breath in the back seat of a stolen vehicle. The boy had fought for air until the very end, calling for his father, who had already died trying to protect him. "We buried him off Route 46, Miles said. "Marked it with rocks. The inhaler's there too. We weren't monsters enough to take that from him." FBI recovery teams found exactly what Miles described: a small, hastily dug grave containing the remains of a child, alongside a weathered asthma inhaler. DNA testing confirmed what everyone already feared. Ethan Walker had been found. When Jennifer Walker received the news, she collapsed in her living room. For 6 years, she had clung to hope that somewhere her brother's children were still alive. Now, that hope was halved. The aunt, who had dedicated her life to finding her family, now faced the grim task of planning a funeral. The Boise community, which had followed the Walker story for years, rallied around Jennifer. Hundreds attended the memorial service, where Michael and Ethan were finally laid to rest together in Dry Creek Cemetery, with a view of the distant Sawtooth Mountains they had both loved. "Michael died protecting his children," Jennifer said during the eulogy, her voice breaking. "And Ethan died because of a simple medication that these monsters denied him." The discovery brought a bitter closure to part of the mystery that had haunted Idaho for years. Michael Walker had not abandoned his children or taken their lives. He had fought to his last breath, defending them. And Ethan, the boy who loved camping and fishing with his father, had endured a terrifying final journey before succumbing to the condition that had always made him vulnerable. As the community mourned, one question remained unanswered: what had happened to Sophie Walker? While Michael and Ethan's remains provided some closure, Sophie Walker's fate remained shrouded in uncertainty. Rory Sanchez's confession during the FBI interrogation revealed a truth more horrifying than anyone had imagined. The 8-year-old girl had been transported across state lines, handed over to anonymous buyers in Las Vegas, like merchandise changing hands. "We never knew their names," Sanchez admitted, his voice hollow as he described the exchange in a dimly lit parking garage on the outskirts of the city. "They paid cash, $30,000 for her, said she had the right look." FBI Special Agent Carla Reeves, who led the trafficking investigation, pieced together a disturbing timeline. After Michael Walker's fatal struggle with Jason Cole, the surviving kidnappers had fled south with both children. When Ethan succumbed to his asthma near Elko, they continued with Sophie alone, following pre-arranged instructions from their employers. "These weren't opportunistic predators," Agent Reeves explained during a closed briefing with Jennifer Walker. "They targeted specific children matching certain descriptions. Sophie fit what they were looking for: blonde hair, blue eyes, the right age." The investigation uncovered a sophisticated network operating throughout the Mountain West. Cell phone records from the recovered device showed connections to similar abductions in Montana's Glacier National Park, Wyoming's Grand Tetons, and Colorado's Rocky Mountain wilderness areas. They exploit the isolation, Detective Maria Santos noted, reviewing the case files. Remote campgrounds, minimal witnesses, and the assumption that missing hikers simply got lost. It's the perfect cover. Jennifer sat motionless as agents showed her maps dotted with similar cases. At least 14 children who had vanished from wilderness areas over the past decade. Each disappearance initially attributed to accidents or exposure, later revealed as something far more sinister. "The network moves them quickly," Reeves continued. "Sophie would have been transported out of Nevada within days, possibly overseas. Despite international alerts and age progression photos distributed across borders, Sophie's trail went cold. The buyers used cash, burner phones, and abandoned properties, leaving virtually no digital footprint for investigators to follow. For Jennifer, this revelation transformed her search. No longer was she looking for closure in the mountains of Idaho. She was searching for a niece who might still be alive somewhere, growing up without knowing her true identity or the father who died trying to protect her. "She's out there," Jennifer would tell reporters, holding the latest age progression photo, showing how Sophie might look as she approached her teenage years. "Someone, somewhere, knows something, and I won't stop until I find her." The FBI's investigation continued, methodically dismantling parts of the trafficking network. But Sophie Walker remained a ghost, a child who vanished into the shadows of a criminal enterprise that preyed on families in their most vulnerable moments, far from the safety of civilization. FBI Special Agent Lara Donovan spread dozens of case files across the conference table at the Boise field office. The discovery of Michael Walker's remains had opened a Pandora's box of similar cases that had previously been classified as isolated incidents. Working with Detective Maria Santos, the agents meticulously reviewed missing persons reports from across the Northwest. "It's not just the Walkers," Maria said, pushing a map marked with red pins toward her federal counterpart. "We've identified 14 similar disappearances in the last decade, all families with children, all in remote wilderness areas." The pattern was undeniable. 3 children from Montana's Glacier National Park, a brother and sister from Wyoming's Wind River Range, 2 boys from Oregon's Mount Hood Wilderness, all vanished without explanation, their cases growing cold as authorities attributed their disappearances to wilderness mishaps, animal attacks, or parents fleeing financial troubles. What troubled investigators most was how the perpetrators exploited the natural dangers of these areas. When hikers went missing in the wilderness, search teams looked for signs of accidents, not abductions. The traffickers had weaponized this assumption, using the vastness of national forests as both hunting grounds and cover for their crimes. Jennifer Walker, who had spent years searching for answers about her brother and niece, joined the task force as a civilian consultant. Her intimate knowledge of the Sawtooth region proved invaluable as they mapped potential routes the traffickers might have used to transport their victims. "They chose the Sawtooth Mountains deliberately," Jennifer explained during one briefing. "Remote enough to avoid witnesses, but with enough access roads to escape quickly. Michael never stood a chance." The mountains that had once represented freedom and beauty to the Walker family now cast long shadows over the entire region. Local guides reported declining tourism as the story spread. Parents kept their children closer on trails. Rangers increased patrols, especially around isolated campgrounds like the one near Alpine Lake, where the Walkers had pitched their Blue Dome tent on that fateful weekend. Most disturbing was how the traffickers selected their targets. Families already struggling, often single parents with children, camping in remote areas to save money on vacations. Michael's financial struggles after his wife's death had made him and his children perfect targets. "They're predators in the truest sense," Agent Donovan told the task force. "They study their prey, learn their vulnerabilities, and strike when they're most exposed." The Sawtooth Mountains, once celebrated in travel magazines for their jagged beauty and pristine wilderness, now carried a darker reputation, a place where children disappeared, and the myth of the lost hiker provided perfect cover for something far more sinister. Every July, Jennifer Walker would pack her weathered backpack and make the solemn pilgrimage to the Sawtooth Mountains. 6 years had passed since Michael, Ethan, and Sophie disappeared, yet the ritual remained unchanged. She would hike to Alpine Lake, set up a small memorial, and spend the day watching the same waters that had witnessed her family's last moments. "I feel closest to them here," Jennifer told a local reporter who had joined her on the anniversary. "Even after finding Michael and Ethan, I know Sophie is still out there somewhere." The sisters' dedication extended far beyond these personal vigils. Between working 2 jobs to support herself, after selling her house, Jennifer had become a fixture at search and rescue conferences across Idaho and neighboring states. Her presentations, featuring the age-progressed images of Sophie that she updated religiously each year, had trained hundreds of volunteers to recognize signs of abduction versus accidental wilderness disappearances. "Michael fought to protect his children until his last breath," she would tell the packed rooms. "The least I can do is fight to protect others from suffering the same fate." Her advocacy reached beyond training sessions. Jennifer spent countless hours in the offices of state representatives, sharing the painful details of her family's story. She compiled statistics on wilderness abductions, partnered with law enforcement experts, and drafted proposals for improved security measures in remote areas. The persistent lobbying paid off. In early 2019, the Idaho legislature passed the Walker Safety Act, named in honor of Michael and his children. The legislation mandated emergency alert systems at trailheads, regular ranger patrols even in off-season months, and specialized training for park staff to identify suspicious activity. "This won't bring Sophie home to me," Jennifer said at the signing ceremony, her voice steady despite the emotion visible in her eyes. "But it might prevent another family from experiencing what we've endured." The Walker Act quickly became a model for similar legislation in Montana and Wyoming, creating a regional network of enhanced wilderness protection. Park rangers now carried special training cards with Sophie's photo alongside safety protocols. On difficult days, when leads ran cold and hope seemed distant, Jennifer would visit Michael and Ethan's shared grave, overlooking the mountains they loved. She would place wildflowers beside their headstone and whisper updates about the changes their story had inspired. "Your sacrifice wasn't in vain," she would say, touching the cool stone. "And I won't stop searching until Sophie comes home or I take my last breath, whichever comes first." In the years following the discovery of Michael Walker's remains, a profound shift swept through the communities of Stanley and Boise. Coffee shop conversations that once dismissed missing persons reports as mere wilderness misadventures now carried a weightier tone. The Walker case had shattered the illusion of safety that Idaho's pristine wilderness had long projected. "We used to tell folks who got scared about bears or mountain lions," said a barista at Stanley's Mountain Brew. "But now we remind them to camp in groups and check in regularly. The real predators don't have claws." Search and rescue protocols underwent complete overhauls across Idaho. Teams no longer focused exclusively on natural hazards or lost hikers. They were now trained to identify signs of struggle, to preserve potential crime scenes, and to recognize the hallmarks of abduction. The Sawtooth National Recreation Area implemented a mandatory check-in system for backcountry campers, with rangers conducting regular patrols even in the most remote areas. Detective Maria Santos, who had initially investigated the disappearance, now conducted workshops for law enforcement agencies across the Northwest. "Michael Walker taught us that wilderness disappearances aren't always accidents," she explained during a training session. "Sometimes they're crimes hiding behind the perfect camouflage of nature." Local outdoor equipment stores began offering free wilderness safety classes. They distributed pamphlets detailing communication protocols and emergency procedures alongside their usual maps and trail guides. Parents who once worried about their children falling into rivers now ensured they carried personal alarms and knew how to activate emergency beacons. Jennifer Walker's tireless advocacy transformed personal tragedy into public awareness. She appeared regularly on local news stations, reminding viewers that her brother's final act had been one of desperate protection. "Michael didn't just die in those mountains," she would say. "He fought for his children until his last breath." The Sawtooth Mountains themselves seemed to carry a different energy now. Tourists still marveled at the jagged peaks and crystal lakes, but locals viewed the landscape with a newfound respect for its dangers, both natural and human-made. Trail markers near Alpine Lake now bore small blue ribbons, an unofficial memorial to the Walker family that park officials quietly allowed to remain. "The wilderness doesn't make evil," an elderly ranger told a group of hikers one summer evening. "It just gives it somewhere to hide." Michael Walker's sacrifice reminds us to keep our eyes open, even in paradise. His words echoed what had become an unspoken truth throughout Idaho's outdoor community. Beauty and danger often shared the same space, and vigilance was the price of freedom in the wild. Michael Walker's final moments in the Sawtooth Wilderness told the true story of who he was, a father who would sacrifice everything for his children. The former Army sergeant had always carried himself with the quiet discipline of a military man. But those who knew him best understood that beneath his stoic exterior beat the heart of a deeply devoted parent. In his final struggle against Jason Cole and his accomplices, Michael fought with everything he had, managing to fatally wound Cole before being overcome himself. The medical examiner later determined that Michael had sustained multiple defensive wounds on his arms and hands. He had died protecting what mattered most to him, his children. Jennifer often remarked that this was precisely who her brother was, someone who would never surrender when his family needed him, even when faced with impossible odds. He bought them time, Detective Santos explained during a press conference. The evidence suggests Michael's resistance created confusion among the kidnappers, possibly giving the children a chance, however brief, to escape immediate harm. Though Michael's sacrifice couldn't ultimately save his son, it did ensure that the truth would eventually come to light. The discovery of Ethan's remains near Elko brought a painful closure to part of the mystery. The boy's small inhaler, still clutched in what remained of his hand, became crucial evidence linking the kidnappers to his death. Forensic analysis of the device revealed fingerprints belonging to both Miles and Sanchez, providing prosecutors with irrefutable evidence of their involvement. Ethan's asthma was his vulnerability, but in death, it became his testimony, Jennifer told reporters, her voice breaking as she spoke at the memorial service. My nephew couldn't be saved, but he helped save others. The evidence recovered from Ethan's burial site led investigators to 3 other trafficking victims who were rescued in Arizona. The Walker case had cracked open a network that had operated with impunity for years across the Mountain West. Yet amid these small victories, Sophie's absence remains an open wound for the Walker family and the Boise community. Age progression photos show a girl growing up somewhere unknown, perhaps unaware of her true identity, perhaps still trapped in circumstances too terrible to imagine. Michael and Ethan have found peace, Jennifer said during a 6th anniversary vigil held at Alpine Lake. But until Sophie comes home, whether alive or laid to rest beside her father and brother, our family's story remains unfinished. For the investigators who continue to search, the truth Michael died protecting is both a burden and a beacon, a reminder that sometimes the highest price must be paid before justice can begin. The final photograph of Michael Walker, Ethan, and Sophie has become an iconic image across Idaho and beyond. Framed in the Boise Police Department lobby, displayed during missing persons awareness events, and printed in countless news articles. Those 3 smiling faces, beneath the towering pines of the Sawtooth Mountains, serve as both memorial and warning. The timestamp, July 19, 2014, 6:43 p.m., marks the last moment of normalcy before tragedy struck. Behind that seemingly peaceful image lies a darker truth, a father's desperate struggle against armed attackers, a young boy gasping for breath without his inhaler, and a little girl vanishing into a network of exploitation that stretched across state lines. The photograph captures nothing of what would follow: the violence, the terror, the years of unanswered questions. Jennifer Walker keeps a copy of that image on her desk, next to the age progression photos of Sophie that mark the passing years. That picture is both the hardest and most important thing I own, she told reporters on the 6th anniversary of their disappearance. It's the last moment I know for certain they were safe and together. For Detective Maria Santos, who spent years pursuing dead-end leads, the photograph represented her most haunting professional failure. We were looking in the wrong direction, she admitted during a law enforcement conference. We were searching for a lost family when we should have been hunting predators. Earl Hutchkins never expected his autumn hunting trip would rewrite the narrative of Idaho's most notorious missing persons case. His pointer Rex was simply following his instincts when he began frantically pawing at the disturbed earth near Redfish Lake. The 71-year-old hunter initially thought his dog had found animal remains, not the evidence that would finally bring truth to light. Rex unearthed more than bones that October morning. He excavated a story buried beneath 6 years of silence, speculation, and misdirection. The loyal dog's discovery transformed public understanding of wilderness safety and exposed a criminal network operating in the shadows of America's most beautiful landscapes. The weathered dog tag bearing Jason Cole's name, the battered phone with its chilling text message, the small inhaler buried with Ethan's remains. These fragments told a story far different from what authorities had initially believed. Michael hadn't fled his responsibilities. He had died defending his children. Ethan hadn't wandered off. He had died in captivity. And Sophie hadn't simply vanished. She had been taken. The Walker case has become more than a tragedy in Idaho. It's a cautionary tale whispered around campfires, taught in criminal justice classes, and etched into the collective memory of the Boise community. What began as a simple camping trip transformed into a haunting reminder of hidden dangers lurking in even the most beautiful wilderness. Jennifer Walker, now in her 50s, still makes the pilgrimage to the Sawtooth Mountains every July. The locals recognize her immediately, the determined woman with weathered hiking boots who walks the trails near Alpine Lake, carrying age-progressed photos of Sophie. Though her hair has grayed and her face shows the weight of years spent searching, her resolve remains unbroken. "I know most people think I'm chasing ghosts," she told a documentary crew last summer. "But somewhere out there, Sophie might be alive. Until I know for certain, I'll keep looking." The FBI officially classified Sophie's case as cold in 2018, but tips still occasionally surface. Each one sends Jennifer's hopes soaring, only to crash when they inevitably lead nowhere. Yet she continues advocating for families of missing children, channeling her grief into purpose. The Walker Act has transformed wilderness safety throughout Idaho. Rangers now patrol remote campgrounds regularly. Emergency beacons are available for checkout at trailheads, and a specialized response team stands ready to investigate suspicious disappearances. Michael's sacrifice created tangible change, though the price was unbearably high. In Stanley, a small memorial stands near the ranger station. 3 bronze silhouettes, a tall figure flanked by 2 smaller ones, facing the mountains. Visitors often leave small tokens, polished stones, wildflowers, or occasionally a child's inhaler with a note of remembrance for Ethan. The trafficking network that claimed Sophie was eventually dismantled through operations spanning 5 states, but Sophie herself was never found. She would be 16 now, perhaps with different hair, different name, different life altogether. Jennifer keeps a bedroom ready in her home, unchanged yet updated with age-appropriate items, just in case. Earl Hutchkins, now approaching 80, still visits the site where Rex made his discovery. The loyal pointer passed away last winter, but Earl maintains that his dog knew exactly what he was looking for that fateful day. "Some secrets can't stay buried forever," Earl often says. "The mountains remember everything. Until closure comes, the Sawtooth Mountains remain both beautiful and haunting, a place where 3 smiling faces once posed for their final photograph together." The wilderness holds its secrets close, but Jennifer Walker holds her hope closer still, waiting for the day when Sophie's unfinished story might finally find its ending.